Have you ever met someone who saw the best in you just when you felt your worst? In a forgotten little town and a rain-soaked garage, two strangers, one heartbroken, one quietly grieving, cross paths in the most unexpected way. She was a bride, left behind. He was a mechanic, still haunted by love lost. What began as shelter from the rain became something neither of them dared hope for: healing, and maybe a second chance. But how do you build something real on the ruins of what's been broken? If you love stories that speak to the heart, quiet, beautiful tales of kindness, hope, and the kind of love that grows slowly but stays forever, take a moment to subscribe and join us here, where every story leaves you a little warmer than before. Now let me take you to a rainy bus stop, and the day everything changed for a woman in a wedding dress and the man who saw what her fiancé never could. A poor mechanic took in a rejected bride at the bus stop. He saw what her fiancé never could. In the heart of a small American town, nestled between pine-covered hills and time-worn back roads, there stood an old garage with a sagging roof and a crooked neon sign that flickered uncertainly at dusk. It read, "Walker's Auto Repair," though only the W and A still lit up most nights. People didn't come for the sign anyway. They came for the man inside. Tom Walker didn't look like much to the world anymore. Mid-40s, lean in the way only hard work makes a man lean, with sun-lined eyes and calloused hands that carried stories too heavy for words. His hair, once thick and dark, now bore streaks of grey that he never bothered to hide. He wasn't the kind to speak unless necessary, never had the energy for small talk, but when he looked at you, really looked, it felt like he saw something deeper than most dared to see. Most days, Tom spent his time elbow-deep in engines, coaxing life back into old Fords and Chevys that had seen better decades. He hummed low to himself, bluesy notes that blended into the clinks and rattles of wrenches and sockets. In a town where folks moved slowly and secrets grew like moss, Tom had become a fixture, predictable, steady, and kind. But behind that steadiness lived a kind of quiet sorrow, the kind that never raised its voice but never truly left either. He had lost his wife, Ellie, 6 years ago, to a cancer that gave no warnings and left no mercy. Their marriage had been simple, unremarkable to anyone else, just long walks, quiet dinners, and Sunday mornings reading the newspaper on the porch. But to Tom, it had been everything. And when Ellie died, something inside him folded in on itself. He didn't rage, he didn't break, he just stopped hoping for anything new. He kept the garage going because it was all he had. The routine gave his days shape. The silence gave him space to breathe. Every morning, he made the same cup of black coffee in a chipped ceramic mug. He swept the concrete floor, even if it wasn't dirty. He kept a small corner in the back where her potted plants had once lived, now just a collection of succulents that refused to die. Like him, they were survivors of something unspoken. Tom never expected company. That's why the knock on the garage door that particular evening took him by surprise. He glanced at the clock, 6:47 p.m., late for customers. He wiped his hands on a rag and pushed open the side door, expecting maybe someone with a flat tire or a lost dog. What he saw instead stopped him cold. A woman, sitting on the bench at the bus stop across the street, head bowed, hair plastered to her face from the rain, and a white wedding dress, mud-streaked, soaked through, clinging to her like defeat. At first, Tom hesitated. This wasn't his business, this wasn't his world. But then she looked up, and in that half-second glance, he saw something so familiar it made his chest ache. A quiet pain, tightly wrapped and desperately trying not to fall apart in front of a stranger. Tom didn't call out. He didn't ask questions. He simply walked across the street, took off his worn-out flannel jacket, and held it out. "It's colder than it looks," he said gently. The woman blinked, unsure. "I'm fine," she whispered. "No one sits at a bus stop in a wedding dress during a rainstorm because they're fine." She gave the faintest ghost of a laugh. "Fair point." He nodded toward the garage. "There's hot coffee inside and a dry chair." She hesitated only a moment longer, then stood and followed. Inside, Tom moved with quiet efficiency. He flipped on the overhead light, revealing the soft clutter of the garage. Tools neatly organized, an old radio humming blues from a forgotten era, and a worn couch pushed against the far wall near a small space heater. "Sit," he said, gesturing. To the couch. "I'll find something dry." He returned with a thick wool blanket and handed it to her without comment. Then he poured 2 mugs of coffee, handed her one, and settled onto a stool nearby. Still, he didn't ask. She noticed. "You're not curious?" she asked. "I figured if you wanted to talk, you would." She looked down at the steam rising from her cup. "My name's Claire." He nodded. "Tom." There was silence, but not the awkward kind. It was the kind that wraps itself around people like a shared understanding. "I was supposed to get married today," she said after a long pause. "He changed his mind at the last minute, said he wasn't sure anymore, said I wasn't," her voice caught, then broke, "wasn't what he pictured his wife to look like." Tom's eyes didn't flinch. He didn't ask what that meant. He didn't need to. Pain wears the same face, no matter how it's dressed. "I didn't know where else to go," Claire added, her voice cracking. "I couldn't face my family, or the looks. So I ran. I got on a bus and got off here." Tom just nodded. "You picked a quiet place to fall apart. Not a bad choice." She laughed again, this time real, if small. "You always this calm." "Comes with age," he said, "and experience." She looked at him for the first time, not just glanced, but really looked. There was something in his stillness that felt safe, like the eye of a storm. She didn't know why, but it made her want to stay a little longer. "Thanks for not asking too many questions," she said softly. "I found people usually say what they need to, when they're ready," Tom replied. The rain tapped rhythmically against the garage roof as night deepened. Claire leaned back against the couch, eyes heavy, fingers curled around the warm mug. Tom stood quietly and pulled an extra pillow from a cabinet, setting it beside her. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "Room in the back's got a cot. Not fancy, but it's dry." She didn't protest. "Thank you," she whispered. Tom turned off the overhead light, leaving only the soft glow of a desk lamp in the corner. As he stepped into the back to leave her to rest, Claire called after him. "Tom?" He turned. "You didn't ask what's wrong with me. Everyone else always did. Everyone always wanted to fix something." Tom held her gaze. "I don't see anything broken," he said, and with that he left her in the quiet safety of a place that, for the first time in a long while, didn't expect her to be anything but human. The next morning broke with the soft grey light of a town that rarely hurried into anything. Outside, the rain had quieted into a steady mist that hung over the hills like a sigh. The garage still smelled faintly of motor oil and steel, but there was something different in the air, a presence like a ghost that had forgotten it wasn't alone anymore. Tom was up before the sun, as always. It was habit, not necessity. The kind of habit that took root when mornings were once shared, when breakfast had meaning and silence wasn't the only voice at the table. He stood at the old kitchen counter in the side room of the garage, pouring hot water over a paper filter, filled with cheap coffee grounds. The smell drifted into the quiet space like memory. Behind him, the small cot he'd prepared the night before was empty, the blanket folded neatly at the foot. Claire had woken early. He wasn't surprised. She appeared in the doorway a few moments later, barefoot, hair slightly damp, now wearing one of his old flannel shirts that hung loosely over the dress she had stuffed in a bag. She looked like someone in the process of shedding a version of herself, one ruffle, one soaked hem at a time. "Morning," she said, her voice soft. Tom handed her a mug. "Black, unless you take it otherwise." "This is perfect," she said, wrapping her hands around the ceramic like it was the first warm thing she'd touched in days. "I hope I didn't wake you." He shook his head. "I don't sleep much." Claire glanced around the small space, the worn-out linoleum floors, the cluttered shelf of parts catalogues, the faded photo of a woman smiling beneath a tree. She nodded toward it. "Your wife?" Tom followed her gaze, then looked away. "Ellie," he said. "Gone 6 years now." Claire didn't offer condolences. She didn't say she was sorry. She just nodded, and in that quiet recognition offered something better, understanding. "You still make coffee for 2, she noted gently. Tom allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "Guess I never stopped expecting someone to walk in the room." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the garage come to life. The creak of old pipes, the hum of the mini fridge, the distant echo of a train passing through town. Claire eventually spoke. "This place, it's kind of peaceful." "Not what most people think of a repair shop," Tom replied, sipping his coffee. "No, but it's got a soul," she said. "I mean, it's not polished, not perfect, but it feels real, safe." That word, safe, hung between them like a truth neither had spoken out loud. Tom set down his mug and stood. "Come on, let me show you something." He led her through the garage, past the rows of tools and half-repaired vehicles, to a corner near the back where light filtered through a dusty skylight onto a patch of green. There, beneath shelves of dusty carburetors and brake pads, were 5 stubborn succulents in mismatched pots. "Unbloomed faintly, Ellie's plants," he said. "I don't have the heart to toss them, and they won't die no matter how much I neglect them." Claire knelt to touch one, brushing a finger across a leaf. "Maybe they know they're still loved." In some quiet way, Tom didn't respond, but his jaw tightened in that subtle way people do when they're trying not to feel too much. The day passed without ceremony. Claire offered to help sweep the floors, tidy the workbench. Tom tried to protest, but she waved him off. "I need to do something," she said. "Something that's not waiting for a bus or pretending I'm not falling apart." So she stayed. She rearranged the old coffee shelf, labeled drawers that had been a mess for years, even scrubbed the window near the front that hadn't seen Windex since Tom could remember. By late afternoon, she looked different, not in appearance, but in posture. There was less weight on her shoulders, less apology in her presence. Tom made dinner. Grilled cheese and tomato soup. Ellie's old standby when money was tight and the nights were long. Claire ate like someone who hadn't tasted real food in days. She smiled, tired but honest. "Best grilled cheese I've ever had," she said. He raised a brow. "You must have been eating some bad sandwiches," she laughed. "Or maybe it's just the company." The room felt warmer then, not from the heater, but from something slower burning, something neither of them named yet. Not attraction, not romance, just recognition. That feeling of being seen, not for what the world expected, but for who you were when the masks were gone. Later that evening, after she had gone to the cot and Tom was locking up the front doors, he paused by the light switch and looked out through the garage window. The mist was lifting. The street lamps glowed against the fog, casting long, quiet shadows. There had been a time when Tom dreaded the evenings most. When the sun set and no one was waiting, the silence of the garage felt unbearable. But tonight, it was different. Someone had waited, not for him exactly, but near him, within his walls, breathing the same quiet air, and that somehow was enough. The rain returned in the afternoon, soft at first, just a whisper on the tin roof of the garage, then steadily stronger, soaking the town in a hush that blurred edges and muffled sounds. Tom stood just inside the bay door, watching the water run in ribbons down the driveway, pooling at the curb like quiet regrets. He had just finished changing the alternator on a '97 Dodge Ram, and the ache in his lower back reminded him he wasn't 30 anymore. As he wiped his hands on a rag, his gaze drifted across the street to the bench at the bus stop where she'd been sitting 2 nights ago, drenched, shaking, alone. That image still lingered in his mind. He hadn't expected her to stay. In fact, he'd braced for the sound of the back door closing quietly sometime in the night. It was what people did, especially the ones who'd been wounded. They left before they could be left again. But Claire hadn't left. She hadn't spoken much yesterday. She had moved carefully through the space, asking if she could help with small things, tidying corners long forgotten, organizing the junk drawer like it mattered. And Tom, not knowing how to tell her he appreciated it, had simply made sure the coffee pot was always full and the garage stayed warm. Today, she was sitting in the corner of the shop with a mug of tea and one of his flannel shirts still hanging loose on her small frame. She was reading a faded copy of Popular Mechanics from 1988 and smiling faintly at the dated illustrations. Tom cleared his throat. "That magazine's probably older than you." Claire looked up, grinning. "It's comforting. Everything's so certain, like if you follow the instructions exactly, you'll always get it right." Tom gave a half smile. "That's not how it usually works." "No," she said, flipping a page, "but it's a nice idea." He returned to his workbench, trying to focus on the carburetor in front of him. But her presence tugged at his awareness. Gentle, but persistent, like the sound of a song you didn't realize you remembered. Around mid-afternoon, the rain reached a crescendo, pounding against the garage doors like it had something to say. Claire stood, walking toward the front window. Her expression softened as she stared out at the empty street. Tom noticed. "You okay?" She nodded, then shook her head. "That's the bus I was waiting for," she said softly. Tom followed her gaze. The old county bus, grey, wheezing, rolled to a stop across the street, hissed open its doors, and sat for a long, wet moment. No one got on. No one got off. Then it pulled away. "I wasn't even sure where I wanted to go," she murmured. "I just didn't want to be there anymore." Tom didn't ask what they meant. He didn't need to. He had his own version of it. A hospital room with fading hope, an empty house filled with echoes. Claire turned to face him. "You know, I never thought I'd be that girl, the one who gets left, the one people whisper about." "No one worth anything whispers," Tom said simply. She gave him a long look. "You don't even know me." "Know enough." Claire wrapped her arms around herself as if the chill from the rain had found its way inside. "You don't think I'm pathetic, just showing up like that, in a dress meant for something that didn't happen?" Tom sat down. His wrench walked toward her, stopped just short of reaching out. "I saw someone brave enough to leave when it wasn't safe to stay. That doesn't look like pathetic to me." Claire looked away, blinking fast. "Besides," he added, voice softer now, "I've seen people fall apart in far more dramatic ways. At least you had the good sense to do it near a garage." She laughed then, sharp and real, and wiped at her eyes. "You're not what I expected." "I hear that a lot," he said, and walked back to his bench. That evening the power flickered once, then steadied. Tom made a simple stew on the hot plate, and they ate by lamplight. Outside the rain finally slowed, now just a steady patter. On the roof, after dinner, Claire lingered near the doorway to the back room. "Tom, would it be okay if I stayed a little longer?" He didn't look up from the dish he was drying. "As long as you need." Claire hesitated. "I don't have a plan yet. I probably should, but You don't have to explain," he said. "Life doesn't always give us the luxury of plans." She stepped closer, her voice quieter. "You're really okay with this? With me just being here?" Tom turned toward her then, drying cloth still in hand, eyes steady. "Claire, sometimes the world drops people into our lives at odd times. Doesn't mean we turn them away. Maybe especially then." She held his gaze, searching for something, doubt, expectation, obligation. But there was none of it in his eyes, only a quiet kind of knowing. She nodded, then turned toward the small room in the back. Before disappearing, she paused. "Thanks," she said. Tom didn't answer. He just watched her go, then turned off the kitchen light. Later, after the garage had gone still and the town had settled into its nightly hush, Tom sat alone near the workbench. The radio played faintly in the background, a jazz station just out of range, the notes warbling like memories half remembered. He stared at the spot where she had stood hours earlier, looking out at the rain, and thought about how strange it was, how someone could arrive in your life with a storm behind them and somehow bring calm. And for the first time in years, Tom realized something. The garage didn't feel quite so empty anymore. The wedding dress hung from a hook near the back room, draped in silence like a ghost that hadn't yet decided to leave. Its once bright white was now dulled with streaks of mud and the faint trace of city grime. The tulle layers clung together in damp folds, the lace torn slightly at the hem. It didn't belong here, among oil stains and rusted bolts, but somehow it did. Claire stood across from it that morning, towel drying her damp hair and studying the dress as if it was someone else's life, a costume from another script. It had been chosen after 3 appointments, 2 fittings, and far too many opinions from people who loved her the way you love something you want to mold. But no one had asked her if it felt like hers. Tom didn't say much when he came into the garage. He simply nodded toward the coffee pot, then to the sky beyond the open bay door. "Rain's letting up." Claire followed his gaze. The clouds had begun to break, slits of pale light slicing through like forgiveness. She exhaled deeply. "I forgot what dry air smells like." Tom handed her a clean mug. "You planning on heading out today?" Claire hesitated. "I don't know. I keep thinking I should." "But you don't want to." She looked at him, surprised. "Is it that obvious?" Tom leaned against the counter, sipping his own coffee. "I've known a lot of people who don't know where to go. They usually stay where they're treated decent until they figure it out." "And you don't mind being that place?" He shrugged. "Garage has got room. Coffee's hot. Doesn't cost me a thing to be kind." Claire smiled faintly, then glanced back at the dress. "I should throw it away." Tom didn't respond right away. "You could, or you could keep it as proof." "Proof of what?" "That you walked away when you weren't seen, that you didn't settle for being invisible." That stopped her. She hadn't thought of it that way. "I didn't walk away," she said quietly. "He left me. Same road, just different footsteps." The day unfolded slowly, like most in small towns. The streets remained quiet, except for the occasional pickup rolling by. Claire swept the garage floor with long, thoughtful strokes. Tom replaced the spark plugs on an old Subaru and tried not to keep glancing her way, but failed. At one point, Claire opened the storage cabinet in the corner and let out a small gasp. "You kept all your manuals?" Tom looked up. "Yeah, can't always rely on memory." She knelt and traced a finger along the spines. Chilton's Guide to Engine Repair, Transmission Basics, even one labeled Electrical for Idiots. "These are amazing. They look ancient." "They are, but they still work." Claire turned to him. "You ever think that's true of people too?" Tom paused. "Sometimes the old stuff's the only thing that keeps running." That afternoon, she pulled out an old rag and started cleaning the front windows. Tom watched for a moment, then returned to his work. He liked the rhythm of having her there, quiet but present, like background music you didn't know you missed. Until it stopped, she worked without being asked. She didn't fuss or over-explain, and she didn't flinch when silence filled the room. That was rare. Most people filled silence like it was something broken. But Claire, she let it be. They shared lunch in the garage office, grilled chicken sandwiches from the diner down the street. Claire picked at hers a bit, then finally asked, "Did Ellie like it here?" Tom looked up, startled. He hadn't heard his wife's name out loud in months. She loved the quiet, he said after a moment. Didn't care for the grease, but she liked knowing where I was, liked the steadiness of it. She sounds steady herself. She was stronger than me, Tom admitted. Braver too. I used to think she married down. Claire raised a brow. No woman marries down when she's loved well. They locked eyes for a moment, longer than was necessary. Something gentle passed between them, a kind of permission to be a little more open, a little more seen. As the sun dipped behind the pines, Claire stood at the workbench, rearranging a drawer filled with tangled wires and half-used screws. She held up a bent bolt and smiled. You keep everything. You never know what you'll need again. I like that, she said softly. The idea that something can be bent and still useful. Tom didn't answer. He just watched her as the last golden light of the day lit her face. Later, as Claire carried a stack of rags to the back room, she paused at the hanging wedding dress. She reached out and touched the sleeve, letting her fingers trail along the stitching. Maybe I won't throw it away just yet, she said. Tom, watching from his workbench, gave a small nod. It's yours. Let it remind you of who you are, not who they wanted you to be. She smiled more to herself than to him and disappeared into the back. That night, Tom didn't sit alone at his bench. He stayed in the office, flipping through one of the old manuals Claire had cleaned, sipping the tea she made, chamomile, because she said it helped her sleep. He wasn't sure it did, but he drank it anyway. The garage felt different now. Not louder, not busier, just warmer. As if someone had opened a window in a house long shut and let in air again. He glanced toward the back, where a faint light glowed beneath the door. Claire was still awake, probably, maybe thinking about all the ways her life had changed in 48 hours. Maybe not thinking at all, just breathing, resting, healing. Tom looked around at the tools, the grease, the familiar disorder of his world, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like the last page of a story. He felt like a new chapter might be beginning. The sky turned the color of steel wool as evening fell over the town, bringing with it a crispness that hinted of the coming winter. The air smelled faintly of pine, oil, and rain-soaked pavement, scents that wrapped themselves around the old garage like a blanket too worn to throw away but too comforting to replace. Inside, the world moved more slowly. The final echoes of tools clinking against metal had quieted. The shop had been swept, the lights dimmed, the heater in the office rattled with familiar effort. Claire sat cross-legged on the old couch in the corner, a flannel blanket over her legs and a chipped mug of tea warming her hands. The wedding dress still hung from the wall in the back, now dry but quietly out of place, like a framed memory no one had the heart to take down. Tom, seated at his workbench, was thumbing through a catalogue of engine parts he didn't really need. He wasn't reading, just letting the silence breathe between them, comfortable and undisturbed. Did you ever think you'd live alone this long? Claire asked suddenly. Tom glanced up, eyebrows raised. Direct hit, he said, setting the book down. Claire gave a small smile. Sorry, it's just, I was thinking about how quiet it gets here at night. I used to hate silence. Now I think I might be addicted to it. Tom leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. It's a strange kind of peace, isn't it? The kind that comes not because everything's right, but because, at least for now, nothing's demanding you pretend. Claire nodded, her gaze dropping to the mug in her hands. Yeah, that's exactly it. They sat for a moment longer before Claire looked up again. You don't ask questions, Tom shrugged. I figure life's already asked you plenty. But don't you wonder? About me? I do, he said simply. But wondering isn't the same as prying. Claire studied him. What if I want to be asked? That surprised him. He thought about it, then nodded once. Okay. Why were you going to marry him? Claire looked away, out the front window, where a lone street lamp hummed in the dark. Because I thought if I became the person he wanted, maybe someone would stay. The words landed like a soft thud in the quiet room. "I spent months changing things," she continued. "The way I dressed, how I talked, even the way I laughed. I thought love meant adjusting, adapting, but somewhere along the way, I stopped recognizing myself in the mirror." Tom didn't speak, didn't fill the space with platitudes. He simply let her voice echo unchallenged. "I didn't think I was beautiful enough," Claire said quietly. "Not for the life his family lived, not for the photos, the country club, the expectations." And eventually, he agreed. Tom's eyes didn't flinch. "He didn't deserve you." Claire chuckled, dry and sharp. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Tom said again. "And I know when someone's light's been dimmed so long, they forget how bright they really are." The silence after that was not heavy, but reverent, like the space between two chords in a hymn. Claire didn't cry. She didn't collapse, but something in her posture softened, like a weight she hadn't noticed was loosening its grip. A few minutes later, Tom stood, stretched his back, and walked toward the small cabinet in the corner of the office. He pulled out an old record player, the kind with a crank and a needle so finicky it took a full minute to coax it into working. Claire watched him with curiosity. "Ellie liked music at night," he explained. "Said it helped her remember the world was still turning even when it felt like it wasn't." He set the needle down. A low scratch preceded the warm, crackling voice of Ella Fitzgerald, smooth and melancholy. Claire smiled. "This feels like something out of a movie." Tom returned to his seat. "Most nights it just feels like routine." She sipped her tea, letting the music drift around them like fog. What was she like? Tom's face softened, the edges of his stoicism bending into something gentler. She was sharp, fierce when it mattered. She knew how to sit in silence, without trying to fix it, kind of like you. Claire didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was almost a whisper. "I think I'd have liked her. She'd have liked you too." They shared a long look, one not charged with romance, but something deeper, recognition, mutual reverence for each other's scars. Eventually the hour grew late. The tea cooled, the record skipped. Tom stood and unplugged the heater in the office, then nodded toward the back room. Blankets are folded on the cot. Extra pillow in the closet. Claire hesitated in the doorway, then turned back. "I don't know how long I'm staying. You'll know when it's time." She held his gaze. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Tom considered this, the in question not catching him off guard, but rather giving him pause. "Because someone was kind to me once," he said. "And it changed everything." Claire nodded, eyes glistening just a little. She didn't say goodnight, only gave him a look that carried more than words could. Then she disappeared into the back room. Tom sat alone for a while, long after the last song had ended. The room felt full but not cluttered, alive but not loud. He thought about how grief never really left. It just took on new shapes. Sometimes it looked like a wedding dress drying in the corner of a garage. Sometimes it sounded like Ella Fitzgerald in the dark. And sometimes, if you were lucky, it came wrapped in the quiet presence of someone who didn't want to be fixed, only seen. And tonight, in the hush of a garage built for fixing things, Tom realized not everything broken needs repair. Some things just need shelter until they remember how to stand. The next morning arrived without ceremony. No dramatic sunrise, no golden light painting the town in promise, just the soft, unassuming grey of an ordinary day, the kind of day most people overlooked. But for Claire, there was comfort in its plainness, no expectations, no questions. She emerged from the back room, slowly, barefoot on the cold concrete floor, wearing that same oversized flannel shirt, sleeves rolled at the wrists. The scent of fresh coffee had already crept down the hallway like a quiet invitation. In the garage's modest office, Tom was seated at the desk with a mug in one hand and a worn notepad in the other. He looked up as she stepped in, nodding once in that quiet way of his. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she echoed, accepting the steaming mug he pushed toward her without a word. They sipped in companionable silence. The heater rumbled in protest, doing its best to keep the morning chill at bay. Claire studied the lines of his face, the quiet weariness, the stillness in his eyes. There was nothing about Tom Walker that tried to draw attention, and maybe that was what made him impossible to ignore. "I used to think quiet meant emptiness," she said, stirring her coffee even though he hadn't added anything to it. Tom raised an eyebrow. "And now?" She considered it. "Now I think it just means there's space for things to grow." He didn't respond right away. Then, "Not everything grows just because there's space." "No," she agreed, "but some things only grow when no one's stepping on them. A flicker of something passed between them, an understanding forged not in shared experiences, but in parallel wounds." Later that morning, Claire wandered out to the front of the garage, where the sun was trying to press through the clouds, half-hearted, but persistent. She leaned against the doorframe and watched as an elderly man parked a rusting Buick and stepped out, clutching his back. Tom came out behind her, recognizing the car, before the man even made it to the sidewalk. "Frank Gallagher. Been driving that clunker since '89. Is it still running?" Tom shrugged. "Barely, but it's like him, stubborn enough to keep going." Frank approached with a grin. "Tommy, got a noise in the engine, sounds like a marching band." Tom gave him a dry smile. "That car's been noisy since Reagan was in office." Frank laughed and handed over the keys. "Just make her sing again." As Tom popped the hood and bent over the engine, Claire lingered nearby, watching. There was something beautiful in the way he moved, efficient, calm, practiced. She'd seen her ex-fiancé fiddle with expensive watches, show off his taste in wine and luxury cars, but none of it had ever felt as grounded as this. "What made you become a mechanic?" she asked, stepping closer. Tom glanced at her from under the hood. "I was 15. My dad's truck died on a back road in February. We were stuck, middle of nowhere. I took it apart on instinct. Didn't fix it that day, but I knew I wanted to learn how." Claire smiled. "You like knowing how things work?" He nodded. "And I like knowing I can help when they don't." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I studied interior design. Dropped out after 2 years." "Why?" She hesitated. "Because my father thought it wasn't a real profession. Said I'd waste my potential making pretty spaces instead of building something that mattered." Tom tightened a bolt with deliberate care. "And what did you think?" "I thought making space for people to feel safe mattered a lot." He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Sounds like you were right." Claire blinked, caught off, guarded by the ease of his affirmation. No one had said that to her before, not without a but attached. That afternoon, Claire took it upon herself to tidy the storage room near the back, an unruly space with stacked boxes and half-forgotten parts. She dusted, labeled, sorted bolts by size. Tom peeked in once, raising an eyebrow. "Didn't ask you to clean." She smiled over her shoulder. "You didn't have to." By the time evening approached, the garage looked a little more alive. The clutter hadn't disappeared. This wasn't a miracle, but there was a sense of care now, of presence. Tom didn't say anything, but Claire noticed the way he paused for a second longer in each room she touched, the way he set down his tools a little softer. As she poured them each a cup of tea later, she said, "You know, this isn't just a garage." Tom took the cup, puzzled. "It's not? No. It's a place where people bring broken things, expecting judgment, and instead get patience." He looked at her, eyes narrowing slightly in thought. "And what about people who are broken? They get patience too." That night, Claire sat on the front step of the garage, knees tucked to her chest, a borrowed hoodie pulled tight around her shoulders. Tom joined her without asking, a second blanket in hand, which he draped over her legs. They didn't speak for a long time. The night was cool, but not biting. Above them, stars peeked between thinning clouds. Claire broke the silence. Do you ever think some people spend so long pretending they're fine, they forget how to be anything else? Tom didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was soft. I think some people were never given the choice. She nodded, her gaze drifting to the quiet street beyond. I used to believe that if I was enough, thin enough, graceful enough, polished enough, he'd love me better. But now I think he just didn't know how to love someone who didn't need fixing. Tom looked at her, long and steady. You're not broken, Claire. She met his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. Then why does it still hurt? He exhaled, slow and deep. Because healing doesn't mean forgetting. It just means learning how to live where the pain used to be. They sat in silence again, not to avoid what was painful, but because they had finally found someone who didn't fear sitting in it with them. And that somehow made all the difference. The first sound Claire heard that morning wasn't the groan of the old water heater or the soft hiss of coffee brewing. It was laughter. Deep, warm, genuine. A sound that felt so foreign in this space that for a moment she wasn't even sure. It was real. She sat up on the cot, blinking at the dusty shaft of morning light cutting through the cracked blinds. The laughter came again, muffled but unmistakable. She slipped her feet into borrowed slippers, pulled Tom's flannel shirt around her, and stepped out into the garage. Tom was crouched near the open bay, talking with a boy, maybe 11 or 12, whose smile was missing a front tooth and whose jeans were grass-stained at the knees. The boy held a soccer ball under one arm and was gesturing wildly toward an old bike propped against the wall. She says I wrecked it, the boy explained, but really it just tipped over, Tom smirked. Tipped over into a mailbox, huh? I don't mean it jumped at me. Claire leaned in the doorway, arms folded, watching with quiet amusement. Tom finally stood and ruffled the boy's hair. Go wash up in the sink. I'll take a look at it. As the boy darted off, Claire stepped closer. New apprentice? Tom glanced over. That's Cody. Lives a few houses down. Brings me his bike like clockwork every other week. Is it always the bike that's broken? Tom gave a soft shrug. His mum's working double shifts. Dad's not around much. Sometimes kids just need a place to bring their wreckage. Claire fell silent at that. She understood the feeling all too well. An hour later, the bike was patched up. Cody was sent on his way with a granola bar and a grin, and the garage returned to its usual rhythm. Claire wiped down the front counter while Tom organized bolts, by size humming softly under his breath. You're good with him, she said. Tom didn't look up. I don't do much, just listen. That's more than most people do. He met her eyes then, something thoughtful behind the quiet in his gaze. You're the one who reorganized this place. He noticed, you know, said it felt nicer in here. Claire blinked. Really? He said, it smells like soap now and the tools aren't scary. That's something. A small warmth bloomed in her chest, unexpected but welcome. Maybe, in her own small way, she was starting to belong here, not just in the space, but in its rhythm. Not a guest, not a burden. Something more like presence. By late morning, Claire had taken to repotting Ellie's succulents on the workbench beneath the skylight. She hummed while she worked, sleeves rolled high, hands dusted with soil. She found an old ceramic mug with a chipped rim and used it as a planter, placing it beside the others like it had always belonged. Tom passed by on his way to the parts cabinet, pausing briefly. Ellie hated those plants, he said with a half-smile, but they refused to die, so she gave up. They're tough little things, Claire replied. They don't bloom much, but when they do, it's quiet and brave. Tom chuckled. Sounds like someone I know. She glanced up, surprised. He had already moved on, but the words lingered. Later that afternoon, they shared sandwiches in the back office. Tom had picked them up from the diner, turkey and Swiss, nothing fancy. They sat side by side at the desk, eating over a shared newspaper. Claire pointed at the horoscopes. "You believe in this stuff?" Tom gave the column a skeptical glance. "Only when it tells me I'll find money in the laundry." She laughed, the kind of laugh that came from deep in the chest, unguarded. Tom looked over at her, surprised by how easily the sound filled the room. It tugged at something he hadn't felt in a long time, not attraction exactly, but a kind of joy, a recognition that her presence shifted something inside him he didn't know had stayed locked away. "You always laugh like that?" he asked. Claire wiped a crumb from the corner of her mouth. "Not lately." Tom nodded, quietly satisfied. In the late afternoon, Tom let her help change the oil on a '94 Chevy pickup. Claire tied her hair back, pulled on a pair of gloves, and followed his instructions like a student eager to learn. "You're a good teacher," she said. Tom raised a brow. "You say that now. Wait till we get to spark plugs." She grinned. "Bring it on." By the time they finished, both of them had smudges of oil across their faces and shirts. Claire caught her reflection in the garage window and laughed. "I look like I've been wrestling in a junkyard." Tom leaned beside her, studying her reflection, then looked at her directly. "I see someone who's not pretending anymore." The laughter faded, but the warmth remained. That night, as twilight painted the sky in brushstrokes of lavender and rose, Claire stood outside near the garage, watching the last of the light sink below the hills. Tom joined her, handing her a steaming mug of tea. They stood side by side, without speaking for a long time. The air was crisp but gentle, the kind of evening that wrapped itself around you like an old song. Claire finally broke the silence. "It's strange how quickly this place feels like home." Tom nodded. "Some places don't need time, they just need space." She turned to him, eyes soft. "You make it easy to breathe, Tom." He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "You do the same," he said after a beat. Claire looked down, her voice barely above the breeze. "Do you think people like us, people who've lost and been left, do you think we get to start again?" Tom didn't hesitate. "I think we already are." And there, in the hush between day and night, with tea in their hands and no need for masks, two people who hadn't asked for a second chance realized they'd stumbled into one anyway. It was Sunday, the kind of Sunday that wore quiet like a second skin. The town moved slowly, half asleep under a pale sky. Church bells rang out in the distance, muffled by the crisp air. Inside the garage, however, there was motion, gentle, unhurried, purposeful. Claire was at the stove in the small office kitchenette, humming softly as she stirred a pot of something warm and familiar. The scent of roasted garlic, herbs, and chicken filled the space, winding its way through the garage like a thread tying everything together. Outside, Tom was finishing a tire rotation for Mrs. Whitaker's aging Buick, but even he paused to take in the smell, eyebrows lifting in curiosity. "You're cooking?" he asked, stepping inside and wiping his hands on a rag. Claire glanced over her shoulder. "I'm trying. It's nothing fancy, just soup. But after 4 days of sandwiches and diner food, I figured we deserve something homemade." Tom leaned against the doorway, watching her. "I can't remember the last time someone made me a meal." She looked up, slightly sheepish. "Well, it's not payment or anything. I like cooking, especially when I'm not being judged for how much butter I use." Tom smiled. "Butter's not a crime around here." Claire grinned, then turned back to the pot, lifting the lid and inhaling with satisfaction. "I don't think I ever realized how comforting this smell was," she said. "Home, I guess, or what I wanted home to feel like." Tom nodded slowly. "It smells like someone belongs." They ate at the workbench that afternoon, using mismatched bowls and spoons with worn handles. Tom cleared a space among the spark plugs and washers, and Claire laid out a folded dish towel like a table runner. The effect was oddly charming, like an unspoken declaration that yes, this is a real meal, and yes, this moment matters. Claire blew on a spoonful and tasted it. Not too salty? Tom shook his head. It's perfect. Honest? I swear on my wrench, she laughed. That sounds like a sacred oath. He chuckled too, then went quiet for a while, eating slowly. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It had taken on the quality of something earned, something shared. Midway through the meal, Tom set down his spoon and looked at her. Do you miss him? The question landed softly, but it still made Claire pause. She didn't answer right away. She stared into her bowl, watching steam curl upward. No, she said finally. I miss the idea of him. I miss the person I hoped he would be. But the real him, the one who looked through me when I wasn't wearing makeup or when I spoke out of turn, no, I don't miss that. Tom didn't push further. He simply nodded as if to say, I get it. I used to think love meant shrinking yourself, she continued, fitting into the space someone else left open for you, no matter how small. Tom looked at her, expression unreadable. That's not love. That's erasure, Claire smiled faintly. I know that now. Oh. Later that day, as the sun dipped and painted long golden lines across the garage floor, Claire sat near the back, sketching idly in an old notebook she'd found in the supply cabinet. Tom walked past and caught a glimpse. You draw? Claire nodded. I used to, before everything got complicated. He peered over her shoulder. The lines were graceful, confident. The page held the early outlines of a redesigned garage, same structure, but with new light fixtures, better shelving, a small waiting area with books and coffee. Tom raised an eyebrow. Is that this place? Claire glanced up, a little shy. Just an idea. It's a good one, she shrugged. It's probably silly. I mean, you've been doing just fine without it. Tom considered that. Maybe. But there's nothing wrong with reimagining something you care about. Their eyes met, and for a moment Claire saw something in him she hadn't noticed before. Not just kindness or steadiness, but pride. Not in himself, but in her, and it warmed her more than the soup had. That night it rained again, softer this time, more like a lullaby than a storm. Claire stood at the garage entrance watching the streetlights blur through the mist. Tom came up beside her, 2 mugs. In hand, offering one without a word, they drank quietly. Do you ever miss the noise? Claire asked. The city, the traffic, people everywhere. Tom shook his head. Noise isn't the same as life. Claire considered that. I used to confuse the two. I thought being surrounded meant being seen. He turned toward her. And now I think being seen comes from stillness, from someone who listens. Tom didn't answer. He just sipped his tea, eyes on the rain. Claire leaned into the doorway frame. You know, if you'd asked me a week ago where I'd be today, I never would have said here, in a garage, in someone else's flannel, holding tea like it's the last thing tethering me to the earth. Tom glanced over. And how does it feel? She smiled, slow and genuine. Like I've finally stopped running. Before heading to bed that night, Claire folded the dish towels, rinsed the bowls, and tidied the little space as if it were her own kitchen. Tom watched her from the hallway, unseen, something stirring in him he couldn't quite name. Not attraction, though she was beautiful in a quiet, resilient way. It was respect, deep and settling. And maybe something else, too, something that whispered of hope. She turned and caught him watching. You okay? She asked. He nodded. Just thinking how fast people can become part of a place. Claire's smile was gentle. Maybe I didn't become part of the place. Maybe the place became part of me. Tom didn't reply, but as she disappeared into the back room, he stood there a while longer, listening to the sound of the rain, the soft ticking of the heater, and the faint memory of a day that had felt like something close to healing. The following morning, the town seemed to wake with intention. The sky had cleared, stretching wide and pale blue above the pines, and for the first time in days, sunlight filtered through the grimy windows of Walker's garage. It settled on the dust motes and lingered on the concrete floor, as if determined to warm everything it touched. Claire stood in that golden light, sleeves rolled, fingers curled around a steaming mug of coffee. She looked peaceful, focused, scribbling something in the corner of her sketchpad. It was a small corner redesign she'd been working on in quiet moments, turning a cluttered workbench into a practical yet inviting storage nook. Beside her, one of Ellie's succulents had begun to bloom, as if catching the change in the air. Tom noticed. He'd been watching from the office doorway, not intrusively, just quietly, the way he always did. Claire hadn't asked for much during her days there. She hadn't demanded space, or explanations, or attention. She'd simply fit. Not like someone trying to wedge themselves in, but like someone who belonged there before either of them realized. Tom took a slow sip of coffee, letting himself enjoy the rare ease of the moment. The bell over the garage door jingled. He glanced up, expecting one of the usuals, Frank Gallagher or Mrs. Whitaker's granddaughter with her squeaky brakes. Again, but the man who walked in didn't belong to this place, and everything about him said so. He was dressed in a navy wool coat, collar stiff, shoes too polished for oil-stained concrete. He looked around the garage as if taking in something he wasn't quite sure how to approach. Claire didn't look up until he spoke. "Claire!" Her entire body froze. Tom set down his mug. The man stepped forward, removing his leather gloves with slow precision. "Claire! It's me. I've been looking." Everywhere, Claire turned. Her face had drained of all color, and the guarded light Tom had come to recognize in her eyes snapped back into place like a defense system rebooting. "Dad," she said, voice flat. Tom didn't move. He just stood behind her, quiet, present. Her father took another step. "I know you don't want to see me, and maybe I deserve that. But Claire, sweetheart, you disappeared. I didn't know where you were. I had to find you." Claire set the mug down carefully, hands trembling just enough for Tom to notice. "I didn't disappear," she said. "I just walked. Away from something that was never mine to begin with." Her father exhaled, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "Claire, I wasn't trying to control you. I just wanted what was best." "No," she interrupted. "You wanted what looked best, what presented best, a perfect wedding, a perfect husband, a daughter who fit into a picture you could show off at board meetings." Her voice didn't rise. It was low, steady, a quiet kind of pain. Tom remained where he was, a steady shape behind her. Claire knew he wouldn't interfere, and somehow that gave her the strength to keep going. "You never asked if I was happy. You never once looked at me and saw someone who was drowning in a dress picked out by other people." Her father looked genuinely wounded. "I didn't know. I thought he loved you." "He did," she said, with a trace of bitterness. "Until I stopped pretending." The room went quiet. Outside, a breeze rustled the wind chimes someone had hung on the gas station across the street. The soft clang of metal against metal, distant but constant. Her father cleared his throat. "Claire, I didn't come to fight. I came to say I was wrong." She blinked. He stepped closer. "I judged you. I judged him. I thought if you married someone safe, you'd have a life without pain. I didn't realize I was handing you to someone who didn't even know how to see you." Claire's mouth opened, but no words came. Her father's gaze softened. "But he didn't see you, and this place." He looked around, taking in the garage, the plants, the worn benches, the dust. "Somehow I think this place does." Looked directly at Tom. "You've been taking care of her." Tom met his gaze without flinching. "I didn't fix her. I just gave her space to be unbroken." There was a long silence after that. Then Claire's father reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. He extended it to her. "This isn't a condition," he said. "It's just an offer. If you still want to open your own design space, your mother's old studio, I'll fund it. No strings. I should have done that years ago." Claire stared. At the envelope, then at her father. Slowly she took it, tucking it under her sketchpad without looking at it again. "Thank you," she said. "But I haven't decided yet." He nodded. "That's fair." They stood in that strange truce for a moment longer before her father turned to Tom. "She's stronger than I gave her credit for," he said. Tom's response was calm. "She always was. You just weren't looking close enough." Then her father left, the bell jingling again as he stepped into the sun. Claire didn't move for a while. She sat on the workbench, staring at the sketch she'd been working on before he arrived. Tom came to sit beside her, careful not to say anything until she was ready. Finally she spoke. "That was the first apology he's ever given me." Tom nodded. "And I don't even know if it matters." He looked at her steady. "It doesn't have to. It just has to be true." She turned toward him, eyes misty but calm. "You stayed quiet. You didn't need saving." She let out a breath that sounded like the end of a held note. "I didn't know people like you existed," she said softly. "People who don't rush in, don't try to fix, don't ask for anything back." Tom looked at her, something flickering. In his chest he hadn't let himself name yet. "You didn't need someone to fix you. You just needed someone who didn't look away." She smiled then, small, sad, and maybe the bravest thing she'd done all week. The garage was quiet that evening, not with the soft, healing silence they had grown used to, but with something heavier, something uncertain. Outside, the first signs of autumn had begun to settle over the hills. The leaves along the edge of the woods had turned brittle gold, the wind just sharp enough to raise a shiver. Claire sat alone near the back, sketchbook open, but her pencil unmoving. The envelope from her father sat beside her unopened. All afternoon she'd meant to look inside, to decide, but somehow she couldn't bring herself to touch it. It wasn't just about a studio or money, it was about trust, belief, her own, her voice, and the thing was, she wasn't sure if she trusted herself yet. Tom had been quieter than usual since the visit. He'd gone about his tasks like always, changing oil, checking tire pressure, adjusting the carburetor on an old Chevy. But his gaze kept flickering toward her, as if wanting to say something and not knowing where to begin. It wasn't like him, and that was what unnerved her most. As the light faded, she finally stood, brushing her hands down the sides of her jeans. Her voice, when it came, was soft but certain. "You've barely said a word since yesterday." Tom didn't look up from the tool chest he was organizing. "Didn't want to crowd you. Since when do you worry about crowding me?" He closed a drawer gently. "Since I realized I might want you to stay." The words settled between them like dust, silent, weighty, undeniable. Claire felt her chest tighten, not with fear, with knowing. "Tom," she began, then stopped, because her own heart was not a simple thing. It had been bruised, reshaped, taught to beat in silence. And suddenly she realized that leaving, returning to her father's world, opening a studio, reclaiming the life she had once wanted, meant leaving this, leaving him, but staying. Staying meant risking everything she had just begun to rebuild. Tom finally turned to her, wiping grease from his hands, eyes unreadable. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "You don't owe me a future just because I offered you a place to rest." "I know," Claire said, her voice barely audible. "I've lost before," he continued, more to himself than to her. "I've been quiet about it for so long, it just became part of the air I breathe. But you being here, it reminded me that stillness doesn't have to mean emptiness." Claire blinked hard. "You think I'm going to leave?" "I think," he said slowly, "you have a choice to make. And I want you to make it without feeling like you have to answer to me." She swallowed the lump forming in her throat. "You saw me when no one else did. You made space for me when I didn't even think I deserved it. And now that I finally feel like myself again, I don't know what to do with it." Tom stepped closer, not touching her, but standing close enough for warmth to pass between them. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said. "But you should know, I see you now, all of you, not as someone broken, not as someone who needs fixing, just as you." Claire looked up into his eyes, and for a moment everything fell away. The garage, the pain, the fear, the past. And what remained was two people, bare and unguarded, standing at the threshold of something new. "I don't want to disappear again," she whispered. "Then don't," he replied. "But if you need to go, I'll understand." She nodded, slowly. "I need to think." That night, she sat on the front step alone. The stars stretched overhead like quiet witnesses. The town was still. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. The street lamp cast a soft glow across the gravel, and a gentle breeze tugged at the loose strands of hair by her cheek. In her lap sat the unopened envelope. It wasn't just an offer. It was a reminder of everything she had left behind. The world that had defined her worth by appearances, that had measured love in terms of status and expectation. A world where her laughter had to be muted, where her boldness had been softened to fit someone else's mold. She opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, short, almost awkward. Her father's handwriting, rigid but sincere, apologizing again, and a check. Enough to restart her life. Enough to say yes to everything she thought she'd lost. She folded the letter, stared at the check for a long moment, then set both aside. The truth was, she didn't want to run anymore. She didn't want to build something to prove she could. She wanted to build something because she believed in it. And suddenly she realized maybe that place was already taking shape, right here, under her feet. When she returned inside, Tom was in the office, sipping tea and thumbing through an old photo album. Claire sat across from him, pulling her knees up onto the couch. "I opened it," she said. Tom nodded, waiting. "There's enough money to start over, to go back, to open something new." "And?" he asked gently. Claire looked at him, not smiling but steady. "I don't want to go back, not to that world, not to the version of me they tried to build." She reached into her bag, pulled out the sketchbook, and opened it to the page she'd been hiding for days. A full redesign of the garage office. Nothing flashy, just cleaner, warmer, with touches that made it feel like home, not just a workspace. Tom studied it for a long moment, then looked up at her. "You drew us into this," Claire nodded. "I did." He set the album aside, his voice rough with something he didn't name. "So, what now?" Claire leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Now, I stay." And with that, something settled between them. Not a declaration, not a promise carved in stone, just a beginning, a quiet, steady start. And for two people who had spent years thinking love had to be loud to be real, this was the most honest sound of all. Autumn settled fully over the town by the end of the week. The air carried that unmistakable scent of falling leaves and distant chimney smoke, crisp enough to bite the skin, but not yet cruel. The trees lining the two-lane highway into town flamed, with color, reds, ambers, rust, and every breeze seemed to shake loose a few more reminders that time was moving forward. Inside Walker's garage, the rhythm of life had begun to shift, subtly, gently, like music changing key. The chaos of summer repairs had slowed, the town's noise had softened, and in its place grew something rare, a quiet kind of joy. Claire stood near the front counter, humming as she rearranged a new shelf display. Potted succulents lined the windowsill now, beside a coffee machine that hissed with dependable warmth. Next to the register was a small wooden box labeled "Free to Take One Good Thought," filled with handwritten notes. "You are stronger than you feel today. This moment is not your final chapter. Kindness always counts, even when no one's watching." She'd written them on Tuesday night. Tom didn't say anything when he noticed the box the next morning. He just smiled, that soft, sideways smile of his, the one he used when words weren't enough. The garage hadn't changed much in structure, but somehow it felt transformed, a little brighter, a little more alive. And Tom, he had changed too, not outwardly. He still wore flannel, still drank coffee black, still moved with that quiet steadiness that made him feel like part of the foundation itself. But there was a lightness in his shoulders now, a softness in the way he looked at her across the room, like he'd exhaled something he'd been holding for too many years. That morning, Claire found him outside, tuning up a rust-red truck with a faded veteran's decal on the bumper. She handed him a fresh cup of coffee and leaned beside him, arms crossed, watching the wind carry leaves across the gravel lot. "You think it's too late to paint the front sign?" she asked. Tom smirked. "You mean the sign that's been hanging crooked for a decade?" She nudged him playfully. "Exactly that one." He set down the wrench and wiped his hands. "What did you have in mind?" "I don't know. Something simple, warm, something that says this place doesn't just fix things, it welcomes people." He glanced at her, eyes steady. "Kind of like you." Claire met his gaze. "You let me be that here." He looked away, pretending to inspect the engine, but his voice betrayed him. "I didn't let you. You just were." That afternoon they walked into town together. It was the first time they'd done it without any particular errand. No parts to pick up, no deliveries to drop off. Just two people, side by side, under a sky threaded with pale clouds. Claire wore her favorite scarf, one Tom hadn't seen before, autumn gold with frayed edges. She laughed easily, the sound ringing out along the empty sidewalk. People noticed. Heads turned, but not in the way Claire had once feared. Not with judgment, with recognition. She wasn't the runaway bride anymore. She was the woman who helped repaint the library steps, the woman who handed out hand warmers at the Sunday market, the one who remembered names, and beside her was Tom Walker, the quiet mechanic who had always been there but who now seemed fuller, not louder, but more. Seen. At the diner they sat by the window and shared a slice of apple pie. "Remember the first thing I ate in your garage?" Claire asked, fork in hand. Tom smiled. "Soggy grilled cheese and soup from a can." "5 stars, she teased. "I was a mess." "You weren't," he said gently. "You were in the middle of becoming." Claire blinked against the sudden sting of tears. She didn't cry. She just reached across the table and touched his hand. That was enough. The sun dipped low behind the hills as they walked back, their shadows long on the cracked pavement. Tom held the door open for her as they stepped back into the garage, now glowing with lamplight and the faint hum of jazz on the old radio. Claire turned toward the back room, the one that had once been temporary, a stopgap in the storm. But tonight, she didn't retreat. Instead, she walked to the workbench and pulled out the sketch she'd kept folded beneath her notebook. It was a rendering of the garage's front sign. Tom came up behind her, peering over her shoulder. "You really want to change it?" he asked. She nodded. "Not all of it, just one small thing." She pointed to where the words "Walker's Auto Repair" were scrawled in bold, hand-drawn lettering. Just beneath, in a softer script, she had written, "Where broken things are seen," and "Welcome to stay." Tom didn't say anything for a long time, then his voice quiet. "That's the truest thing anyone's ever put on a wall." A week later, the new sign was up, painted by Claire, hung by Tom. People noticed. They asked questions. They smiled. Some left with more than just an oil change. They left with a thought tucked into their pocket, a warm drink in their hand, a feeling they couldn't quite name. One rainy evening, a couple in their 50s pulled into the lot with a sputtering engine. They sat quietly in the office while Tom worked, and Claire brought them tea. When the woman looked around, taking in the cozy touches, the music, the smell of lavender from a small dish on the counter, she said, "It feels like someone put their heart into this place." Claire smiled. They did. Tom stepped in then, wiping his hands, and nodded toward the street. Rains letting up. The couple left with a working car and a folded note from the wooden box. The garage door closed behind them with a soft click. Claire turned toward Tom. "The rain's always letting up around here." He met her eyes. "It has a way of doing that when someone's waiting on the other side." That night, they sat on the front step together, sharing a blanket, mugs of chamomile in hand. No declarations were made, no grand gestures, just a gentle leaning in, her head resting on his shoulder, his hand finding hers, fingers lacing together. Like roots finally settling into soil, there was nothing left to prove. They had seen each other, truly seen, and chosen not to look away, and that in the end was love. Not the kind with fireworks, but the kind that waits at the bus stop in the rain, the kind that fixes broken things without asking why they broke, the kind that stays. What did you think of the story? Have you ever met someone who saw the real you when no one else could? I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment and say hello. It means the world to know who's out there, sharing these moments with us, and if this story touched you in any way, consider subscribing. Here, we tell stories that heal, stories that remind us of the goodness in people, and stories that make you feel a little less alone in this world. So if that's something you need, this space is for you. Thank you, truly, for spending this time with me, wherever you are, and whatever your heart is carrying tonight. I hope you leave this story feeling just a little more seen. Until next time, take care and be kind.